And to talk more about that, senior fellow at the Trinity Forum and contributing writer for The Atlantic, Pete Wehner. His new piece is titled "The Evangelicals Who See Trump's Viciousness as a Virtue."
And in it, Pete, you write in part this: "It is odd to see the very same evangelicals who claim the Bible is inerrant and who criticize fellow Christians about matters such as ordaining women on the grounds that they are being unfaithful to what Paul wrote in one of his epistles, an interpretation that many biblical scholars dismiss Jesus' most famous sermon. For these Christians, the teachings of the Son of God take a backseat to the pronouncements of the King of Mar-a-Lago. Much of today's evangelical world sees Trump's viciousness not as a vice, but as a virtue, so long as it is employed against those they perceive as their enemies, against those whom they resent, and for whom they have a seething hatred."
And this comes, Pete, you write this. I'm sure you saw what Beth Moore wrote this weekend. And for those who don't know Beth Moore, it would tell you in Pensacola when I was, coming of age and then going to college and practicing, you would have Foreigner come to the Pensacola Civic Center and it would sell out. You would have, Michael Jackson would practice there. You would have all these big acts rolling in. Journey, it would sell out. And then Beth Moore would be there for, I think, a week and just teaching people about the gospel. And that Civic Center would fill up night after night after night. It is hard to overstate the impact that Beth Moore had on evangelicals back in an age when they actually didn't care who you voted for or who you didn't vote for so much. I want to read what Beth Moore wrote this weekend because she's been basically excommunicated. Her books have been thrown out of Christian bookstores. She has faced just extraordinary abuse. And in a very long post, she wrote this: "I believe we are meant first and foremost to call out our own house, our own side, and our own identity group for its mind-boggling hypocrisy." And I know, Pete, you feel this every day and it stings. She says, "These were my people, evangelicals, conservatives, and you, like me, like Beth, like Russell Moore, like so many people I know, we do not recognize many of the people that we love, we still love so much, who literally, if I needed a kidney transplant tomorrow, every one of them would give me theirs and I would give mine. We are family and we love them, but I just don't understand how they turn a blind eye to so much of what they see every day."
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe, and I think you and Reverend Sharpton got at it, which is the issue here is less Donald Trump than it's the followers of Donald Trump. I agree with you, Beth Moore. She was very influential in my daughter, Christine's life, and she's a person of real courage because people turn on her, like, as you said, Russell Moore and others. What explains this? I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and it doesn't have one answer. But I do think that what we've discovered over the last 10 years is that for a lot of people who proclaim to be followers of Jesus and sincerely proclaim to be followers of Jesus, their core identity actually is not faith. I think their core identity is in many cases political or cultural, and that they tag faith on. It's not as if faith isn't important, but they have these certain pre-existing views, then they're amplified in the social media world. And then Donald Trump, because of his constant inflaming of passions and grievances, just connected with them. And so in the end, what they've done is they've taken teachings and verses and deformed them, but convinced themselves that they're acting with faithfulness. So there's something particularly disturbing about this, and the effect on the Christian witness, and I say this as a person of the Christian faith, is incalculably damaging. And so few people are willing to stand up. You named probably half of them in the show, so far. That's another thing that's troubling in these times.
Peter, just to kind of clarify, sorry, Joe, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We have a slight delay here. I do want to say, though, Katty, that there are several churches I go to different places that are evangelical churches. I would guess 90% of people in those churches probably voted for Donald Trump. And I will say I have heard more than one pastor, just like this weekend, say, what happened? What happened there is repugnant. That video about Barack Obama is unchristlike. So it is interesting. When you're in the churches, sometimes you hear people calling out some of the worst. But then you look at polls that show, an overwhelming majority of white evangelicals are supporting ISIS tactics. And part of that, we have to remember what Tim Keller said before he passed. He said he stopped calling himself an evangelical because he realized it had less to do with religious affiliation than with cultural identification. There are just a ton of people calling themselves evangelicals, Katty, who just don't go to church.
Yeah, and I guess the question for those pastors that you've heard is how long can they carry on speaking up before they draw the attention of outside movements or of a MAGA movement that then, turns the wrath of God, to use the phrase, on them, and they are forced into a position where they can't speak up anymore. One of the things, Peter, I thought was so interesting about what you've been saying is that there was a sense in 2016 that this was a kind of Faustian pact
right.
that the evangelical movement did with Donald Trump. OK, and you've heard some evangelicals say it. He's not perfect. He is a sinner like the rest of us.
Right.
We aren't electing a saint. We are electing a president. They were prepared to overlook some of his personal weaknesses in order to get the judges, in order to get the Supreme Court rulings that they wanted. But you seem to be saying something different, which I think is more alarming, which is that actually the viciousness that we have seen recently is something that they actually like.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, a lot of evangelicals that I spoke to in 2016 said that the corruptions in Donald Trump was a bug, not a feature, but they were willing to tolerate it because they thought it would advance their political agenda. But what you saw over time is one accommodation after another. This is what happens with human beings when you make moral accommodations. And beyond that, what happened was, and Trump never changed, and he kept playing this role of a kind of fierce warrior on their behalf. What happened is that these people over time became vivified by what he said. They became energized. And I think it was that he personified their anger, their grievances, and their resentments, and things that they wouldn't have been comfortable doing. They were really glad that he was willing to do it. And over time, if that's your mindset, you begin to embrace it. It becomes a part of who you are. So I think today, what unfortunately is the case is the more wicked he is, the more offensive he is, the more insulting, the more cruel he is. For an awful lot, not all evangelicals, but for an awful lot, that's a reason to support him, not to be repelled by him.
It's really telling. And Pablo, I mean, again, as somebody that was in Washington during the Clinton years, it's laughable that the same people now who are embracing Donald Trump then were writing books on the Book of Virtues and using it against Bill Clinton every day. When character was king, all you heard from conservatives, all you heard from evangelical pastors was the lack of character. You cannot run this country and be of poor character. If my people who are called by my name shall submit themselves before me and turn from there. I could go on and on. Yep. We heard it over and over again. But I guess the red letters, Jesus' teaching, the Gospels, I guess they apply to Democrats, but they don't apply to Republicans? Is that what we're learning here?
You were talking about all the bands that played in that arena in Pensacola, and there is this thing of like, you say you like Jesus. Can you name any of his songs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, Rev, the thing about why evangelicals, why any religious leader would be in favor of this administration is because, most generously, they're using this administration in their minds to get something they want. This feels like, it's good for the business, perhaps, that I have. But I think the concern they should logically realize at the point that everybody else who's been seemingly benefiting from Donald Trump is realizing they're actually being used by him, and it's eroding the institution that they are going to have to protect long after he's gone. And that would be something that I would be thinking about, too.
And you must also consider that if you are trading with him to get something you want, do you do it at the expense of who you are?
There's a parable about that, I think.
Yeah, I think you are correct about that. And but before you get to the parable, I think that we must realize these are not just regular people that's at the breakfast. These are leaders. And if you're sitting there as a leader and applauding or allowing that, then you're really saying to your following, I really don't have a problem with this. And whatever I'm saying on the pulpit is performative because I don't believe it. So then what are you transacting rather with him to get something for when you really don't believe it yourself?
Right. I mean, just, Joe, the thing of like, he's our champion. No, he's using you as a meat shield.
Right. It's so obvious. I mean, it is so obvious that that's happening. And again, the hypocrisy is just crazy. And you know, the same people that would say, by your fruits you will be known, are the same ones that are just turning a blind eye to everything. And you're talking about parables. I mean, my gosh, the Good Samaritan.
Yes.
You look at what's happening in Minneapolis. Jesus is asked specifically when he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my neighbor? He tells the story of the Good Samaritan, a foreigner that is hated and despised by his audience. And he says, that's your neighbor.
Right.
That's your neighbor, not the person you love, not the person that makes you feel best about yourself, not the person who shares your same belief system, but the despised, hated Samaritan that did what the priest didn't do, that did what the worker didn't do, took care of a person in distress. It is so clear cut. Also, not to go into it too much, but Matthew 25, 31 through 46, the disciples, this isn't like an administrative reg in the gospel. They say, what must we do to be next to you? To sit at your right hand, what must we do? And Jesus says, many things, you know, feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit people in jails, welcome the foreigner, the stranger. These are verses and parables that lie at the heart of the gospel. And it's one of the few times where they say, what do we have to do to be with you, to have eternal life? And Jesus always turns it back to them. Take care of the least among these. Because when you do that, you're taking care of me. Well,
and he wouldn't acquiesce to the rich when the rich ruler came.
No.
And asked him, what should I do? He didn't say fund my ministry. He said, sell all you have and give it to the poor.
Yeah.
And when Nicodemus came at midnight, one of the off the record meetings, he says, you must be born again. He never played to the elite.
He threw the money changers out.
His last act was he threw the money changers out of the temple who were changing money to pay off a corrupt government.
And all these people that are going around and like these prosperity gospel people, you talk about complete charlatans.
Right.
Jesus says that it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into the gates of heaven. And his disciples were like, oh my gosh, well, who can be saved? And he said, well, you know, for man, maybe that's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. But time and time again, the widow who gives her last penny is seen by Jesus as being the richest among all the people. You can go on and on about this. All of the things that evangelicals right now, leaders seem to be holding up, are the very things that Jesus preached against his entire ministry.
Yeah, we know Jesus' teachings about wealth, and to your point of welcome the stranger, we see how President Trump's administration deals with migrants. They've sent some of them anyway to the hell prisons of El Salvador. Well, the president of El Salvador was also speaking at the prayer breakfast, was also applauded by that very same.
A guy who brags about torturing people.
Was there, welcomed warmly by those at the prayer breakfast. Contributing writer at The Atlantic, Pete Wehner. Pete, thank you so much. His new piece available to read online now.